Today was supposed to be my first stream since, 2023? But unforeseen circumstances happen and it can't be helped. So hopefully this makes up for it. Let's see if I can remember anything about my favorite show on Nickelodeon from over a decade ago. Avatar Aang. PL 19, almost PL 20. It wasn't until I realized that I could put limited on the contents of the Avatar state that he came back down. Okay, he's a generally good guy, but with a higher calling that requires him to maintain the world's balance, preventing tyrants from getting too full of themselves. He and I would have a conflict of interest. He does have a romantic interest, though it's unlikely Katara would become the damsel in distress. Aang should receive a penalty on intelligence checks involving modern culture and current events, as he pulled a Captain America and took a cryogenic vacation. And lastly, he abides by a personal code, likely due to his religion. Most of you probably remember his refusal to kill Fire Lord Ozai, but that's common heroics. It's also notable that Aang avoids eating meat and insists on shaving his head, though he was willing to forego the latter when he needed to go incognito. Minor details, but important when role-playing Aang in particular. Physically speaking, he is a human, and though he is young, I gave him stats befitting his adult counterparts. On top of his training, people in his time are hardier. Remember, this was before AC and heating. There were even people comfortable living in Arctic climates, and though that shouldn't apply to Aang, he didn't express any complaint that I recall in the cold. Dexterity and agility got the most love here, and anyone who has seen Aang fight knows why I put so much into dodge. Given his preferences, he'd rather let the opponent wear himself out and possibly even befriend them down the line. Bending was fascinating to make. I almost took Move Object 20, maybe with the variable descriptor modification, but that doesn't quite work because it is possible for Aang to bend multiple elements at once, or at least that was the case when he was in the Avatar state, so I chose to make 4 arrays for various effects involved with bending. My advice, if your players like to run murder hobos, do not let them be an airbender. They will move object air out of people's mouths for a perception suffocation effect. The second element Aang learned was water. Needless to say, all ranged attacks have this source flaw from the regeneration power. You can't shoot ice bullets you don't have. Also, if your players like to run murder hobos, don't let them be a waterbender. Guess what blood is mostly made of? Earth came third. Besides chucking rocks, he can make armor for himself out of nearby stones. He can ensnare foes that are grounded, but if your players like to run murder hobos, do not let them be earthbenders. The human body is primarily made up of oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. You know what else those things make? Dirt! Dust your NPCs are, and to dust your NPCs will return. And firebending. Does what you expect, but because reasons, Aang can also deflect lightning. But he needs to do it right, or side effect 1, he gets some sort of injury, possibly death. If your players like to run murder hobos, this is actually a good element for them. Normal attack and resistance checks, or at least I'd call that normal. And surprise! Energy bending! So the name implies that it can do all sorts of game-breaking nonsense, but we will only be taking the only effect we've seen Aang use it for. No Ozai, this is not resisted by will. We'll be pretending to be a Mon and make it a dodge resistance check. Its low number makes it only practical to use on beaten foes, ensuring the campaign's plot can move normally. Now, I limited this to taking and restoring bending, but this could theoretically be used to nullify mutations in general, up to the GM of course. And now the super form you've been waiting for, the Avatar state. Everybody is concerned now because you are glowing, so +5 presence, +5 for the intelligence of all the past lives, and a variable effect to use on bending however you want. To make this cheaper, consider the holding back advantage from the Hero High sourcebook. Oh, and he's more connected with the spirit world than most of his contemporaries. He can go have tea with them whenever he wants, or whatever. I don't know. They might know stuff. Skills! He is from history. He can have the good checks. He's probably learned history from Roku and them anyways. You might be surprised at my granting of deception. He has been surprisingly successful with disguises. For advantages, I considered his agile and flexible fighting style, and through his journeys, he's come to know people. However, I put most of my thoughts into Appa. There's only 2 words for Appa. Big lug. We can add lovable too if you want. He's fluffy and good with kids. Most GMs would probably turn this down as a player character because of the high power level, but I would encourage them to consider Aang nonetheless. This could be watered down to a time when Aang only knew 1 or 2 elements. And on a side note, what if Korra didn't accidentally end the Avatar cycle? What if there were avatars well into the sci-fi future? Do I smell OCs?